And good morning. It is time for the Mike Hewitt Show. Brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. And now your host, Mike Hewitt. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Brian Thomas. Good morning, Jim Riley, Ludwig von Wiedendorsky, and Pax. Listen, folks, I was going to start this show with the stats from yesterday's two primaries, which we'll get to, but I got to tell you, I've got to start with Donald Trump makes wild threat to spill the beans on Ted Cruz's wife. Now, I don't know if you folks have followed that. It was a tweet, and I won't bother you with the details of the tweet, but that's essentially what it said. But it started with what I predicted all along. It started with evidently either Ted Cruz or maybe one of the PACs that are supporting him ran a slick, as we say in the advertising business, and maybe that was a poor choice in this particular instance, but he ran an ad that included imagery of Mrs. Trump, who, as we know, used to do some rather risque modeling. And so Trump obviously responded very poorly to that, and now everyone's clapping like penguins with excitement to find out what Trump has on Ted Cruz's wife. And I gotta tell you, having been a candidate before, this is just absolutely deplorable. That we're talking about each other's kids, we're talking about each other's wives. This, my friends, is not presidential politics. What say you two?
I don't agree with it. It's supposed to be the unspoken code is families were off limits. But I think this may have started in 2012 or 2008 when they started talking about Sarah Palin's family.
The daughter.
The daughter, and then her youngest with autism. And
when you say started it, keeping in mind that they took Andrew Jackson to school because his wife had forgotten to get divorced before she got married. It can get very confusing.
Well, modern times. Most people didn't know Andrew Jackson's wife was married before.
I say that and speaking of that, today is, Brian Thomas, you should have reminded me. Today is kind of like a dress rehearsal. I got to stop myself and make this point for a minute.
Yes, we are in uniform.
So the folks that are listening in Grand Rapids for this dress rehearsal know that we've got our tuxedos on. I've got a big top hat. I've got the cane. Folks, we're talking about dress rehearsal for the addition of the Grand Rapids WTKG to the Mike Hewitt Show. So today's dress rehearsal, we're excited about it. So those folks listening, thanks for listening. And get us all dialed in, get the audio just perfect.
Yes, got to do some tweaking, tweaking.
Got to do some tweaking. Oh, yeah. Took me 3.5 years to tweak the show to this level. So
that was scary to watch Brian tweaking.
Oh, man. So anyhow.
Well, at least we weren't concerned about twerking.
No, there's no.
There's a fine difference between those two
you can only tweak on radio. You can't really twerk.
Nobody wants to see four old bald guys tweak. I'm telling you, even you
or twerk or whatever.
Tweak, twerk. See, I can't even talk that way. Thank goodness. Anyhow, presidential politics has been ugly over the years. I mean, you go back to the Hamilton and the Burr race. You go all the way forward. Even Honest Abe and his opponent got really muddy in the deal. But what changes it, I think, is the immediate communication of Twitter and CNN and Fox News and NBC, et cetera, where if you say anything that you wish you could have taken back, it's immediatally everywhere.
Would you hit send?
It's gone. Boom, done.
Well, what's ironic about this whole thing is about a month ago they asked Donald Trump if he would bring up Bill Clinton in the general versus Hillary.
He doesn't have to. Bill Clinton will bring up Bill Clinton.
Yeah. Well, he said it's fair game. He was a former president. It's not just a spouse. It's a different circumstance.
And I think not only that, but Bill Clinton has been out advocating from a political position.
Mm-hmm. And that's what he said.
And I don't. So I'm kind of with Trump on that. Yep. Now, on the other hand, in this newest where I'm going to spill the beans on you, Mrs. Cruz, maybe that's off limits. Maybe, but listen, everyone knows I am not a Trump apologist.
Mm-mm.
On the other hand, I don't blame him for being angry. But when you're running for president of the United States, and your wife has done a whole bunch of nude exposés, you got to think that somebody along the path is going to use them. And if he thinks for one moment that Hillary Clinton will not have her operatives searching the internet, searching people's garbage cans and everything else to find pictures that they didn't release, pictures that we're going to have probably the most ugly general election that America has seen in a very long time.
I would be surprised if Melania is the #1 Google search today.
Yeah, well, it's been in the past. Imagine going forward where one of the greatest Google searches will be pictures, nude pictures of the First Lady.
Yeah.
I am wondering if, in fact, this is actually that either the Cruz campaign is and somehow been compromised and is actually pro-Trump at this point, because this is the time, and this is truly one of the benefits to an extended, albeit maybe angst-ridden, long primary season. This is the time when you want the bad stuff to come out. By the time we get to the general election, all of those folks inclined to be searching for those photos will have already had them, seen them, and be bored with them. This is really, really, for Trump, this is absolutely the best gift he could ever get.
Yeah, you're probably right about that, but it is none of this rises to the depth. Is that a way of saying that? Rises to the depth of having Jeb Bush endorse your candidacy.
Oh, boy.
I think I'd rather the rest of the stuff than that. Please don't. No. Geez, that hurt.
First Romney, now Bush. Cruz is going, would you guys stop?
Yeah, I'm really not establishment. Please stop that. Was it Bonner, one of you said before we went on the air?
Yeah, John Boehner.
Boehner. I always say his name wrong.
Essentially, really run out of the Republican Party leadership.
Yeah, so he endorsed everybody, and there was nobody left but Kasich, who...
Virtually everybody he looks at disappears.
Speaking of, maybe they're using him like a heat-seeking missile.
Oh, but
we got to get rid of him. Go ahead and endorse him. Okay?
It's like Village of the Damned, you know?
Well, speaking of Village of the Damned, what do you think Kasich is up to, guys?
I don't get it. I just pointed out before we got on, he's got less delegates than Rubio, who dropped out.
Right? But he took his home state. That's his state.
A winning.
So he wants to be president of Ohio.
Mondale won one state, too. How'd that work out?
Listen, we're going to have John Yob in a little bit, and I'm a little bit confused about what's going on the Virgin Islands, but I think John Yob took the delegates from the Virgin Islands. So we're going to be asking him that, in which case he may be in competition with Kasich, and he's not a recognized presidential candidate. So there's some fun stuff happening.
What I think is weird is if the party really didn't want any conspiracy about this contested or brokered or whatever they're going to call it convention, John Kasich would drop out. There's no mathematical way. He knows it. Everybody else knows it.
I think he has been.
The only thought for him to stay in is that he's planning on that. And if that's the plan, then they got to stop talking like as if this thing isn't going to happen, because it's apparently going to happen by view.
This thing happening, meaning
contested, brokered, whatever they're going to call it, convention.
The question is can he get to the anywhere near the basket?
Well, that's the other thing is they had that one rule that they put in with the Romney convention that you have to win 8 states to be considered. Well, if he continues to stay in, you already know that rule is going to be changed. It has to. Otherwise, why is he staying in?
I got to tell you that the one thing about Donald Trump, I don't think anybody wants to try to take him to school on rules, because he'll have an entire state load of attorneys show up to say, "Nyah." Mm-hmm. You can hose a lot of folks, but I don't. And again, I'm not. Maybe he's winning me over. I scare myself.
I think so.
But I don't think they're going to push the boy real hard without him just slapping the heck right out of him.
No, and he does scare him a bit because
they don't know what to do with him.
He can self-fund a third even if he wants to. I mean,
self-fund a third.
Third-party running. He's still got.
What would be the point on that? That's just a Hillary victory.
Oh, yeah.
That's
I
all
agree.
that means. I mean, the boy's not stupid. But I will tell you on the Kasich topic that I firmly believe that Kasich is in the Trump camp. I think they've sat down and he said, yeah, I'll make you the secretary of Goldfish or something. I think there's been a deal made, and that's the only rational reason for Kasich to still be in. In a brokered convention, to think that the public, those that identified themselves as Republican and voted in Republican primaries or caucuses, if they tried to flip it over so Kasich with one state was the winner, I think Trump is right. There'd be some rioting. There would be some really angry people. It would be the immediate explosion of the Democratic Party, or the Republican Party, rather.
Well, you stated last week you would be done.
If they airdrop somebody in, but listen, to their point, this has been done a number of times. So when they're looking at it, they're thinking, what's the big deal? This has happened a lot. Happened with Abe, like we talked about last week. What was it, 6 ballots, I think it was, to get Abe on there? If you listen to the current chair of the RNC, I think he said in an interview the other night that it took 7 ballots for him to become the chair of the RNC. So,
let me just jump on this one point, because I keep watching all the people who are smarter than us, who have the greater college degrees than us, who are far more connected, the Karl Roves and the George Wills and the rest of them. And all of this, if it goes to the convention, then what, is predicated on the fact that Donald Trump's popularity, which we have seen in every single primary election to date, including yesterday, will somehow magically change tomorrow, whatever your definition of tomorrow is. In other words, if these guys have been saying the same thing, that he can't possibly win, now they're kind of coming on, well, maybe he can. But if it gets to the convention, the simple facts are, I'm looking at Real Clear Politics, all of the polls going forward. Donald Trump has absolutely double-digit plus massive leads in just about every single future state. For this to go to a convention is actually, that's the very unlikely event.
There's no question that he is going to go there. The overwhelming in my exchange, my ongoing evening exchange with my friend who's a Trumpster. I now refer to Donald Trump as the presumptive nominee. I don't think there's any question that he is the presumptive nominee. He's going to win California. He is certainly going to win New York State,
Pennsylvania,
probably Wisconsin. When you look at the big ones to come, there is no path to, and I'm a Cruz guy, there's no path to victory. I've said that about each of the candidates that's fallen away. So to your earlier point, Jim, when I look at Cruz, I don't know that he's been compromised, but I think clearly he's in it to negotiate now, because there's nothing left that he can get on the ground. When you do the math and it now takes him 90% of the remaining, it's not going to happen. I have a greater chance of being president, and I'm not running. So clearly he's in it to negotiate. The same as Kasich. I just don't think Kasich's got a whole bunch to offer. Now, there'll be a lot of people that say, Mike, you're wrong. He's got Ohio to offer. But that's the assumption that Ohioans will only do what Kasich says, which frankly is insulting to think. Those folks down there are pretty smart people. So I just don't buy into they're tied to his wagon and he's got control over them.
Well,
I think they've got control of themselves.
They're so smart that they voted for Obama in the last 2 presidential elections. So in terms of the brilliance of the Ohio voter, I would question that myself.
But yeah, you can, but we're not talking about a general election. We're talking about a primary.
Sure.
And so the math is very, very different. And speaking of that, one of the points I want to make before we flip to our break coming up, the last point I want to make is one of the things I hear that's confused a lot of folks watching television is that the news often tries to portray this as an election, and it isn't. It is a nomination for a party. And there are parties like the Libertarian Party and the Constitution Party, the Socialist Party of America, et cetera, those other parties that put forward a presidential nominee, they do not do it through a ballot box nominating system. They do it in convention. I say that because there is a big difference here, and I don't know that some folks necessarily have connected that, but we can't look at this like an election that was stolen because it's a party nomination. So with that, we're going to go to a break, and somewhere during the next segment, John Yob will call in and give us some information about a chaos convention and his delegates from the Virgin Islands. Folks, we'll be right back.
And now back to the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com, into segment number 2.
Hey, folks, listen, we've still got in the studio with us Jim Riley and Ludwig von Wiedendorsky, Pax, and Brian Thomas. Joining us on the line is John Yob, who is the president of Strategic National, which is a nationally recognized consulting firm. John, you're also an author of Chaos. Tell me about Chaos for a second.
How you doing, Mike?
Very nice, sir.
Good.
Tell me about the book Chaos for just before we get going into the rest of this.
Sure. I've thought for actually several years, but certainly for the last 18 months, that this would end up going to a contested Republican National Convention, and therefore I wrote a book on what that would look like. There hasn't been a contested convention since 1976 and no multi-ballot convention since 1948, so I recognize sort of the fact that a lot of voters out there and even activists and consultants and media types aren't aware of sort of how the convention process works. As you know, the conventions are sort of my specialty. It's where I got started in this industry, and therefore I wrote essentially a operator's manual for the convention process.
Very nice. Tell me something else. I think you're collecting up some titles. Do I understand that you're a delegate holder from the Virgin Islands?
Yeah, I was the top vote getter in the Virgin Islands caucus.
So you're a presidential candidate then, John Yob?
Well, I don't know about that, but I'll be an uncommitted delegate to the national convention. I've been spending a lot of time in the Virgin Islands for going back to 2009 or 10, and gradually spent a few weeks, then a few months, and then finally started making offers on houses in 2012. Made about a dozen offers over the next 4 years, and then finally closed on our home in November of 2015, and our children started school.
Very, very, very cool. I'm excited for you, but I'm also excited, I think, for what's to come. What are you expecting from the convention, John? We had John, I think, 6 weeks ago, and it feels like the field has changed a lot since then, or maybe it's just slowly getting into the focus that you were predicting.
Yeah, I think we're still headed towards a contested convention. It is very, very hard in a multi-candidate field with only 9 winner-take-all delegations to ever get to a majority. So even though Donald Trump is winning relatively convincingly and has won a majority of the states, it's going to be very, very hard for him to win a majority of the delegates prior to the national convention. So I very much think we're on track towards a contested convention.
When you look at a guy like we were kind of shooting a breeze before you came on, John. When you look at a guy like Governor Kasich, who frankly he's got less delegates in his bank account than does Rubio that dropped out. What's his agenda? What's he get out of this? What do you suppose, John?
Well, I would say that, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln came in third on the first ballot and ended up as the nominee. In there's been 8 contested conventions on the Republican side. 6 times the candidate who did not have a plurality going into the convention ended up as the nominee. I think, and in RNC chairman elections, which are the most congruent example in modern history of these types of contests, oftentimes the candidate who doesn't come in first on the first ballot ends up winning the contest. So, the contest is based on winning a majority of the delegates. It's not a contest of winning the plurality. Just like in runoff states, you need to get a majority in order to win. There's similar rules at the Republican National Convention level, and ultimately you'll need a majority. Now, I happen to think if Donald Trump goes in with a strong plurality and he's just a few votes away from a majority, that he'll get a majority on the second ballot or at some point on the floor. But it depends on where he comes in. It depends on how good of a job he does in electing friendly delegates in these state convention contests across the country.
Sure. Now, listen, one of the things we've talked about on the show a little bit last week and some this morning is the idea of what will Republican primary goers and caucus goers, how are they going to feel? I'm afraid the Republican Party would be very damaged if they came in with a drop-in like Kasich or somebody else that we don't even know about yet. Is there any thought about what will happen to the party if they flip this election?
Well, it depends on who you think they is when you say they flip this election. I mean, these are the delegates who are elected and apportioned based on the results of these caucuses and primaries across the country. So it would be the delegates, not some party leader, not some, smoke-filled back rooms, power
Right.
brokers making these decisions. These are the delegates to the National Convention who are elected either on the ballot in a lot of states or through a state convention process, and in most cases are loyal to the current field of candidates.
Sure. So
I expect that the nominee will be one of the current field of candidates. It's always possible that Ryan or Romney pulls off some miracle, but with about a 98% likelihood, it'll be one of the current candidates.
So just so folks can visualize how that process works, because I think the way the media, if you're just watching Fox, for example, they want you to think one thing. But even here in the 2nd District that I chair, at least for the Republican committee, the process is this. The folks in the state of Michigan yesterday evening, every county in the state of Michigan had a Republican county convention. And in that county convention, they elected state convention delegates who will then go on April 8th and 9th. On the 8th, which is our caucus for the 2nd District, which I will be chairing, you'll have any number of people vying to become one of our 3 national delegates or 3 alternate delegates. And you can believe, folks, that those 3 campaigns, Kasich, Cruz, and Trump, will all have people in there whipping votes for their candidates, trying to end up with national delegates that they know are not flippable on the second ballot. Am I accurate in saying it that way, John?
You nailed it. And I would point out one other thing. It's not just flipping on the second ballot. It's also electing Rules Committee and Credentials Committee members within each delegation that will represent the interests of their candidate. So, for example, in Michigan, no candidate has a majority of the delegates. But there'll be elections within the delegation once the delegation is elected for Rules Committee and Credentials Committee members. So it'll be very interesting to see which campaign supporters win those crucial spots that will likely ultimately determine the playing field and therefore the ultimate winner.
I can tell you this. I've been in and around the party in West Michigan for 14 or 15 years now, and before that over in Oakland County years ago. This process that I watched last night with the county conventions and then the 2nd District process that I'm directly involved in, I have never seen such a really focused, concerted effort to make the process transparent and fair. In this regard, I give all of the Republicans, at least in West Michigan that I've got direct contact with, man, I give them kudos because they are standing on themselves, trying to make sure that everyone understands the rules and that the rules themselves are fair to all of the participants. Is that kind of what you're seeing across, from your vantage, John?
In Michigan, at this early stage, I would say that that's what I'm hearing as well. You know, you never know until the cards are down at the state convention in terms of whether that stays that way.
Right.
But so far, I would say that the campaigns seem to be more focused on making sure they get the delegates they were properly allocated, rather than trying to steal each other's delegates. But again, I do assume that there will be some what I call sinos, supporter in name only, in the book. And by the way, in the book, you can get it at conventionchaos.com on Amazon. But in the book, I articulate 8 different ways that folks at home can impact this convention process. So I would urge all the folks to participate at the county convention level, and then, of course, at the state convention level.
To tell me, one of the questions that I'm hearing asked a lot, at least locally, is the proration process. Let me give you an example of the question. 2nd District will have 3 delegates and 3 alternates for national convention, and we have 3 candidates. So Cruz in the 2nd District, Cruz won overwhelmingly with, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but 46 or 48% of the vote. And then the balance was divided fairly equally within a couple percent between Trump and Kasich. So if you have 3 delegates and Cruz was such an overwhelming vote, does he only get 1 vote? How do those 3 delegates properly represent the vote mix that took place?
Yeah, frankly, I don't think that the allocation rules in Michigan were set up very well this cycle. I think it was sort of stupid the way they were set up. But the way they were set up is that there's a complicated formula at the district level,
right,
where you essentially subtract like 30, maybe 33% from each person, from each candidate after they're awarded a delegate, which sort of, unless you really, really do well, like in the high 50s, you're essentially only going to get 1 of the 3 delegates per congressional district. You know, from a grassroots perspective, it's sort of nice because then 1 person of each candidate's supporters can participate in the convention process, and you don't have campaigns that are shut out at the district level.
Right.
But
I think
in terms
that
of
was
making
probably
Michigan,
the goal.
Yeah, exactly. But in terms of making Michigan important on the national stage, passing out the delegates in an equal fashion doesn't exactly give any candidate a net positive delegate balance. And so I would say at the national level, it probably hurt Michigan's importance in the nomination process. but it allowed more a more diverse group of grassroots activists to participate in the convention.
Yeah, and I think there's been a bumpy few years, and so the goal was exactly that, was to try to spread this out so everyone didn't feel like they were getting snipped out of the program. So
That's exactly right. I mean, famously, the Michigan Republican Party shafted Rick Santorum out of delegates in 2012, and some party leaders lost their elections over it, or in some cases didn't run for re-election over it. And so I think that this was essentially an attempt to make the point that, hey, we're going to be fair this time, and we're not going to shaft any of the candidates. Right.
That's kind of how that's what I got out of it, was an exact, almost a push to the other extreme from that. They've been over maybe even too far, but certainly I get what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
Do you have a prediction for who's going to come out of this as our nominee, John?
I don't. I try not to make predictions, partly because I'm unaffiliated right now, and
right.
I'll be an unaffiliated delegate, and so I'm not taking sides. Obviously, the candidate who has the most delegates has the best chance of winning. So if you're in Vegas and you're a bookmaker coming up with odds, then certainly Donald Trump is the odds-on favorite. That said, if you go into a contested convention without a majority, conventions are anything if unpredictable. So, anything is possible once it gets to the convention floor, but you'd have to give Donald Trump a strong edge at this point.
Just a light-handed question. I'm looking at your Facebook page. What's with the cartoon? What's with the cartoon faces that you've been using? How does that tie into this, John?
So in the book we had cartoon characters made of some of the sort of key players in the convention process. So we had cartoons made for folks like Reince Priebus and the co-chairman Sharon Day and Saul Anusis and some other key folks who are part of the national convention process. Folks are having fun with them. They're sharing them online and able to encourage their friends to read about their role in the convention in the book.
Was there some legal activity that I'm reading about regarding your Virgin Islands?
Yeah. So I was running against the husband of a member of the Board of Elections. In the Virgin Islands, they have a board of elections rather than a Secretary of State to oversee elections.
Right.
And so the woman by the name of Liliana Belardo, she had the supervisor election, Ms. Fox, essentially tossed me off the ballot by saying that I wasn't a registered voter here, and therefore I had to essentially sue them in court. And yesterday, the judge granted a temporary restraining, I got previously a temporary restraining order on my side, and now yesterday she sided with me again and essentially says there is unlikely to be any 90-day registration requirements. We got another victory in court yesterday. Things are moving in the right direction, and it's interesting. The difference in sort of my days the last 2 days. So yesterday I spent my day in court arguing with people from St. Croix about whether or not I live on St. John. And then this morning, I spent my morning at my child's Student of the Month celebration when he won Student of the Month on St. John. So a little interesting difference between my 2 days, but such is life.
Listen, I got to ask on that, because if you've been watching the weather report back here, we're narrowly escaping what was supposed to be a big storm. And I'm hearing a little wind where you're at, but I'm going to guess it's probably a pretty nice sunny day right now.
Oh, it's absolutely beautiful. Yep, I'm out here on the deck and looking at the sunshine, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, John Yob, it makes me think I made a mistake in life.
Well, the grass is always greener on the other side.
Yeah, I reckon everything's a trade. You don't know what you're going to get, but when we're knee deep in snow and I'm watching your Facebook, I'm a little bit jealous, I got to tell you. So when you get to the convention, obviously I shouldn't say obvious, but I agree with you. Everything tells me it's going to be contested. How does your unassigned delegate status play a role there?
Sure, there's a number of roles that you play. One is that we'll be electing people to the Rules Committee and the Credentials Committee. There's only 112 members of the Rules Committee, and we'll elect 2 of those, and so we'll have a big say in that process. Same thing with the Credentials Committee. Then we'll have a say in ballot access. So famously there's a rule called Rule 40B that you need a majority, not a plurality, but a majority of the delegates, not a majority of the vote, but a majority of the delegates from 8 states or territories in order, 8 delegations in order to get ballot access at the National Convention. So, for example, Cruz isn't quite there yet in terms of ballot access. Trump is the only one that has ballot access so far. Kasich doesn't have ballot access yet. And so the territories can play a role in providing or blocking ballot access for the candidates. And then finally, on the floor, we're one of only 6 delegations who can vote however they want on the first ballot. Wyoming, Colorado, North Dakota, American Samoa, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands can vote how they want, and therefore are what we call free agent delegations. And then ultimately, as other delegations become unbound on later ballots, we can also have a big impact in swaying momentum accordingly. So,
John? Is that the same thing for the Democratic Party?
No, the rules are very, very different for the Democratic Party. Especially as it relates to superdelegates, there's a lot more superdelegates in the Democrat Party, and more importantly, the superdelegates are all free agents in the Democrat Party. So it is very, very hard to win as an outsider running in the Democrat Party, and that's why Bernie Sanders has the cards stacked against him, regardless of how he does in these state contests.
Right.
In the Republican Party, they call them superdelegates still, or the media does anyway. But the reality is the RNC members are bound on the first ballot, at least according to the presumed RNC rules. There are some RNC members that argue that no, we're not bound, for a variety of reasons that are highly technical. But the consensus and conventional wisdom is that they are likely to be bound on the first ballot.
Right. Listen, we're out of time, but do me 2 favors. First off, I'd like to plan on having you back on once we get past our Michigan State Convention. And then secondly, before you go, please tell the folks how to find your book again.
All right, thanks. Yeah, happy to come on anytime, Mike. You do a great job. And to look for the book, you can go to Amazon and type in Convention Chaos, or go to conventionchaos.com.
Very, very nice. John, enjoy the weather down there, my friend. Folks, we'll be right back.
This is the Mike Hewitt Show.
Renegade River, guns and ammo, and so much more. Old-fashioned service with surprisingly low prices. On M104 at the top of the new 231 bypass in Utica. Or find us at renegaderiver.com, because you deserve it.
Now, back to the Mike Hewitt Show on News Talk 1090 WKBZ and Talk 1230 WTKG.
And we are back. Yes, we are. And you know what this means. At this very moment, we have made it to, prepare yourselves, the Enigma Report.
Listen, folks, I've got 2 articles sitting here in front of me on my iPad, so I don't have this big, gigantic plethora of papers, but I do have 2 lengthy articles, and they are, actually, it's our culture. Our culture is slowly becoming an enigma to me. The one article is written by a fellow named Peter Hasson, I think, Hasson, Peter Hasson, titled, Michigan Schools to Let Students Choose Gender, Name, and Bathroom. And I read that title a couple, 2 or 3 times to try to get that through my head. So I read the article, and part of my show prep for this was to speak with an area very tenured public high school teacher to say, how is this manifesting itself on the ground in real life? And he explained to me that they're literally going to have multiple bathrooms, and that the school pays for it, and that its goal is to avoid liability, meaning lawyers. I have not a really great high opinion of lawyers, although I try. Here's the problem. Schools don't pay for it. Taxpayers pay for it. And we're dealing with a percentage that is less than 0.1 and of folks that are gender confused. And I ask myself, what about the folks that are not gender confused? And we know all the cliched examples. So you're a 14-year-old girl and you're in the bathroom, and beside you in the next stall is a gender-confused boy who's standing on the toilet looking over the top of you go, and I pause and I think, what the heck are we doing to our culture? And so, well, and I read on Facebook, by the way, one of my daughters posted this article on her page, and she had folks really, really upset with her as she questioned the wisdom of this. So much so that they unfriended her. And I pause and I think about it. Are these folks pausing for a moment while they feel for the person that's confused, that less than 0.1% I'm talking about, while they feel for them folks, are they at all pausing to feel for the 99.97% of the folks that are going to be really put off by this, or all the taxpayers that are going to pay for the addition of bathrooms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And I sit and I read this thing, and I got to tell you, it's an enigma to me. I don't get it. This isn't a lesbian or a gay issue. This is about whacking the culture we live in at a direct expense to taxpayers, and the direct expense of our teenage children, who we know are going through a confused state just because we've all gone through it. Okay, that's the point of entering puberty, and you've got all kinds of chemistry going on in your body, and it is a confusing time. And when folks are young people, they're in elementary school and they're getting A's and B's, and their parents are proud of them, and then they lose their brain when they're 12 or 13 and they're in junior high, and some of their grades slip and some of their friends change, and you're going, oh, what's going on? That's not a gender crisis. That's not what that is. And to call it anything but that is concerning. Listen, the other article that I had before me is College of Pediatricians called Transgender Ideology Child Abuse. Now, that's a very important title because it isn't science. It's politics. And that's what's really important. And it's why I decided to include this topic on my politically driven show, because this isn't some 12-year-old that's going, jeepers, I don't know what I am. Because, yes, they do. I mean, stop it. This is ideology. And more often than not, it's ideology born from parents, not from confused children. And I'm not a pediatrician. I'm not a learned person. I'm just a regular fella that's grown up in America and raised 4 daughters, and I've been a child myself. This is child abuse. I'm sorry. It is. I can't find any other way to define it. It's like saying, we don't have a problem, let's create one, and then we'll find the solution together. I'm going, that's an enigma to me, that we're going to flip our society upside down for a very, very small percentage of folks that really need some professional counseling, not to reinvent the surroundings around them. I'm befuddled by it. What do you gentlemen think? Am I off in the weeds on this enigma?
Not at all. I had Paxton with me right now. He knows he's a boy. There's no doubt. He stands to pee. He doesn't ask to wear dresses. He doesn't ask to wear makeup. He knows he's a boy. My daughter knows she's a daughter. This is just one more form of the hippie movement.
Part of the problem,
what I call it.
Part of the problem when I look at this stuff, by the way, is, and you folks have all heard me say this on a number of different occasions over the years of this show, but the philosophy in the classroom of one generation will be the philosophy in government in the next. And these pediatricians were exactly right to call this an ideology.
Yeah.
Jim Riley, what say you?
Well, let's number one clarify something, which we talked about off air. Even though we do have a Republican administration in our state, John C. Austin, who is the president of the State Board of Education, is an elected Democrat. Interestingly, a 2-time elected Democrat.
He's up for re-election again.
He was re-elected in 2008. So this is this is a proclamation, if you will, that was made and will be instituted without any legislative or gubernatorial input. But there's another step to this idiocy, and that is that the guidance seems, the way that it was written, seems intentionally to cut parents out of the process. So we mentioned that maybe there's hippie parents and everything else. This was written to make sure that parents are neither notified nor questioned about this. And I'll read you the part of the guidance. Quote, school staff should address students by their chosen name and pronouns that correspond to their gender identity, regardless of whether there has been a legal name change. Now, keep in mind here, number one, we're keeping the parents out. Number two, we are putting the onus on teachers now to not just, however, maybe they've changed the name, to use the correct pronouns. There have already been an explosion of lawsuits in colleges and other areas where the a boss or coworkers are not using the correct pronouns. So your tax dollars are going to be paying for these lawsuits that they will probably win because someone made a mistake in him or her.
It's crazy to me. Now listen, I got it, but there's a different mindset in the halls of places like the Department of Education. I remember when I was raising up my 4 daughters, and I was at the school for one of them in a meeting, 4th or 5th grade, and it was an academic issue. It wasn't a social issue, but I'm sitting at one of the little tables, and the teachers and the administration were there, so we're all big people sitting at a little table, and that was kind of quaint. And then to begin the meeting, they pushed over this document. It was a several-page document that was titled Your Parental Rights. And before we could begin the meeting, I had to read this and sign it. I said, you folks are very confused. I don't have the parental rights that you're telling me I have. I have absolute rights. And for you to think anything different is absolutely over the top. So what I did is I took their document. They said, well, we can't talk unless you sign it. Okay, then we're going to work on this document together. That'll be our focus today. And so I went through and made all of the changes necessary to make that document have an ounce of common sense, crossed out, X'd in, wrote new language, initialed here, initialed there, and caused them to. And I said, listen, just so you know, the other alternative is me to take my 4 daughters and go. And if this is how you're going to raise up children, you're going to be sitting in your classrooms alone.
And this is many years ago. Things have gotten a little more stringent since.
But is what I've been saying, the philosophy of the classroom in this generation will be the philosophy in the classroom in the next. And so when you look at that, they've went from, my daughters are now from their late 20s into their early 30s. And now we're dealing with people that are Pax's age, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so the treadway that we've made from then to now is scary by any definition for anyone paying attention. And if we let this keep going, you're not going to even recognize America. It's one thing for us to sit here and opine and say the America that we grew up in isn't the same. You won't recognize it in the next generation if we don't say enough is enough. And for those folks that can't understand how Donald Trump is getting traction, is this crazy idiocy right here that's causing regular people to say, stop it.
Well, remember, elections matter. We voted for this man twice.
It's time to undo that decision. Folks, you need to pay attention to this. If you've got children or grandchildren and you're not paying attention, you're avoiding your civic and your family duty, in my view.
This isn't an Obama problem, though.
This is state level. This is local and state.
This is well beyond just the recent times. This has been a progression. I have a friend on Facebook who every day posts throwbacks, and they pick different things. Like today was the one she posted was about being a kid in the 80s and having recess and free reign and playing Red Rover and Cowboys and Indians. And we become such a hypersensitive.
I'm offended and I'm entitled.
Yeah, it's been progressive down the line.
The helicopter parents where when we grew up, at least when I grew up, it was be home when the lights came on.
I genuinely had a woman down the street come out and yell at me one day because
I don't blame her,
didn't
by the
have
way.
a helmet on when he's riding his bike.
Yeah, I remember you telling that story on the air.
Yeah,
it gets to the point, for my view, we're raising children. I fear at least that we're raising children that will not have, not only they're absent of the critical skills that I believe are incumbent upon parents and teachers to teach them, but they're not going to have basic judgment capacity because they've not been allowed to make it. We are so regulated and so controlled, and we're changing the definition of when you talk about changing the definition of how you refer to a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old, folks, this is crisis on a social level. We're watching the fabric of the United States be unwoven.
Well, like your post today, about the Rome.
A lot of people didn't care for that, by the way.
I liked it. It's the truth.
It is. I said, welcome to the final days of Rome before the collapse. These things are societal's undoing, not because of the far less than 1% that have troubles and should get help, but because of the impact we're having on the balance of the 99+% that don't. All because of what? Because of the insanity of fear of a lawyer? We got to get a hold of ourselves.
Lawyers,
Doctors,
cause, fear.
and you go, what are we thinking as a society? I don't get it. I really, really don't. So I don't know what the cure is. What's the cure, guys?
The cure is to educate yourself and vote, because if in fact you vote your rights away, other people will take those rights and have fun with them.
Listen, folks, find us on Twitter at Talk Mike Hewitt. Find us on the internet at themikehewitt.com. Find us on Facebook at /The Mike Hewitt Show. Thank you very, very much, and we'll see you in about a week. And I'm excited about it. Maybe by then it'll be really closer to real spring with no threats of snow. Folks, we'll see you in a week. Thank you very, very much.